Think your Ontario hometown is safe from economic collapse? Think again. Behind the friendly small-town facades and community pride, 10 cities are racing toward devastating population exodus that could wipe out property values and destroy local businesses within months. You might believe places like Tillsonburg or North Bay are immune to the urban housing chaos hitting Toronto and Ottawa. But right now, warning signs are flashing red across smaller Ontario communities where entire generations built their lives. Tillsonburg. Tillsonburg was supposed to be different. This southwestern Ontario community built its identity around tobacco farming for over a century, creating generational wealth that supported thousands of families. But in 2025, that agricultural foundation is crumbling faster than anyone imagined. The numbers tell a brutal story. Population has dropped 8% since 2020, making Tillsonburg the fastest shrinking city in southwestern Ontario, according to Statistics Canada data. That's not gradual decline, that's mass exodus. Young families who once stayed to inherit family farms are packing up for London, Toronto, and Waterloo, where job prospects actually exist. Main Street looks like a war zone. The vacancy rate has hit 34% as historic businesses close permanently. Storefronts that served the community for decades now display for lease signs that never seem to come down. When your local economy depends on agricultural workers who no longer exist, everything else collapses too. Here's where it gets devastating. Tobacco processing plant closures eliminated 2,400 jobs over just 18 months. These weren't minimum wage positions either. We're talking about skilled manufacturing work that supported entire neighborhoods and local spending. Imperial Tobacco and other major processors decided Ontario operations weren't profitable anymore, leaving behind empty facilities and unemployed workers. The housing market reflects this economic reality with crushing clarity. Average home prices fell 15%, but properties now sit 89 days on the market without serious buyers. Even at discounted prices, who's left to buy when the jobs disappeared? Tillsonburg proves that agricultural communities face unique vulnerabilities, but they are nothing compared to what happens when entire cities depend on extracting resources from the ground. Elliott Lake. Elliott Lake represents the most extreme version of resource dependency collapse. This northern Ontario mining town didn't just lose its industry, it lost an entire generation. With a median age of 58.7 years, it's officially Canada's oldest city, where the workforce is literally aging out of existence. The demographic math is terrifying. When your average resident is approaching retirement age, who's left to work, spend money, or buy houses? The uranium mining boom that built this community ended decades ago, but the aftershocks are still devastating families today. Young people don't stay in Elliott Lake after high school. They can't. There simply aren't careers that can support a family. Housing market data reveals the full scope of this demographic disaster. Home sales volume collapsed 67%, while prices dropped 22% year over year, according to local real estate board statistics. But here's the crushing reality. Even at heavily discounted prices, there aren't enough buyers under retirement age to sustain the market. The infrastructure is crumbling alongside the population. Hospital consolidations have forced medical services to relocate to larger centers, making healthcare access a 2-hour drive for many residents. School closures mean the few remaining young families have no choice but to relocate if they want their children to receive adequate education. Municipal finances are in freefall. The tax base is eroding as fixed-income seniors struggle with rising property taxes and utilities. When your entire population lives on pensions and government benefits, how do you fund basic city services? Elliott Lake's slow-motion demographic collapse feels manageable compared to communities that face sudden industrial shutdowns, where thousands of workers lose their livelihoods overnight. Kapuskasing. Kapuskasing experienced the economic equivalent of a heart attack when Spruce Falls Power and Paper announced its permanent closure in 2024. This northern Ontario forestry town lost 800 direct jobs overnight, but the real devastation came from the 1,500 indirect positions that disappeared when the economic anchor vanished. The ripple effects hit every corner of the community. Local restaurants, equipment suppliers, trucking companies, and retail stores all depended on mill workers and their families. When your biggest employer eliminates nearly 2,500 jobs from the local economy, everything else crumbles fast. Population exodus has accelerated to 4.2% annually as young workers pack up for Sudbury, Toronto, or Alberta's oil fields. Climate change is making everything worse. Extreme weather events have increased insurance costs by over 60% for residential properties, according to recent municipal reports. When spring floods damage roads and winter ice storms knock out power for weeks, infrastructure costs skyrocket just as the tax base shrinks. The forests that once sustained Kapuskasing are now burning more frequently and growing more slowly due to changing weather patterns. Housing inventory has doubled, but here's the cruel irony. Prices remain inflated relative to what local workers can actually afford. Properties listed for $300,000 might seem reasonable compared to Toronto, but they're completely unattainable when the highest-paying jobs left town. Real estate agents report homes sitting vacant for 6 months or longer. The forestry collapse in Kapuskasing proves that natural resource dependency creates massive vulnerability, but even cities with diversified manufacturing bases discover that losing key employers triggers the same destructive cycles. Chatham. Chatham's downtown core tells the story of manufacturing decline better than any economic report. The Ford plant closure that eliminated 1,450 direct jobs created a domino effect that destroyed over 3,000 additional positions throughout the community. When automotive suppliers, trucking companies, and service businesses all depend on one major employer, the entire economic ecosystem collapses together. The visual evidence is impossible to ignore. Commercial vacancy rates downtown have reached 41%, creating an urban decay cycle that feeds on itself. Empty storefronts attract crime, which drives away remaining businesses, which creates more empty storefronts. Historic King Street, once bustling with shops and restaurants, now looks like a post-apocalyptic movie set with boarded windows and for lease signs everywhere. Home foreclosures tell an even more devastating story. They've increased 89% as residents simply can't meet mortgage obligations on properties they bought during better times. These aren't subprime borrowers who overextended themselves. They're skilled workers who lost steady manufacturing jobs and discovered that replacement work pays half as much if it exists at all. The demographic shift is accelerating the decline. Young people are fleeing to Windsor's remaining automotive jobs or Toronto's diverse economy, leaving behind an aging population that can't sustain local businesses or property values. High school graduates see no future in Chatham, and frankly, they're making rational decisions based on economic reality. Chatham proves that manufacturing towns face existential threats when major employers relocate, but the vulnerability extends beyond single industries to communities that seem economically stable until their foundational supports suddenly disappear. North Bay. North Bay was supposed to be different because it never depended on a single private employer. This Northern Ontario regional center built its economy around government services and post-secondary education, creating what seemed like stable, recession-proof employment. But federal downsizing has shattered that illusion completely. The numbers are staggering. Federal government cuts eliminated 1,200 positions over just 2 years, according to Public Service Union reports. These weren't entry-level jobs either. We're talking about well-paid professionals who owned homes, supported families, and drove local spending. When Environment Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and other departments consolidated operations in Ottawa, they took North Bay's economic foundation with them. Nipissing University's struggles compound the government job losses. Enrollment has dropped 23% as students choose larger universities in Toronto or Ottawa with better career prospects. That's not just fewer students buying coffee and renting apartments. It's professors, administrators, and support staff losing their jobs as the university shrinks to match declining enrollment. The rental market tells a brutal story. Properties that house students and government workers now sit empty for months. Landlords are slashing rents just to avoid total vacancy, but even discounted units struggle to find tenants. The average home now sits 73 days on the market, with prices down 12% year over year, according to local real estate board data. Young professionals who might have stayed in North Bay for government careers are heading to Toronto or Ottawa, where opportunities actually exist. The regional center that once attracted talent from smaller northern communities is now losing its own residents to larger urban areas. North Bay's government-dependent economy seems stable until political decisions in Ottawa changed everything. But at least bureaucratic employment offers predictable salaries, unlike communities that bet everything on seasonal visitor spending. Cobourg. Cobourg discovered that lakefront charm can't overcome basic economics when discretionary spending evaporates. This picturesque Lake Ontario community built its housing boom on wealthy buyers seeking weekend retreats and investment properties. But economic uncertainty has wealthy Canadians tightening their wallets, and vacation properties are the first luxury to go. Second home sales have plummeted 45% as Toronto and Ottawa professionals redirect their investment dollars towards safer assets. Properties that sparked bidding wars among cottage seekers in 2022 are now sitting empty with price cuts that still can't attract buyers. When your housing market depends on people with enough wealth for multiple properties, economic anxiety hits fast and hard. Airbnb hosts are feeling the squeeze from both ends. Revenue has dropped 38% as travelers choose cheaper destinations, forcing property owners to flood the long-term rental market just to cover their mortgages. Short-term rental properties that generated $12,000 annually are now struggling to earn half that amount, according to local tourism board data. Here's the cruel irony destroying Cobourg's economy. Local workers like teachers, nurses, and retail employees can't afford homes inflated by vacation buyer demand, but those vacation buyers are disappearing. The community priced out its own workforce during the boom and now can't fill the economic gap when tourism spending collapses. Seasonal businesses that depend on cottage country visitors are struggling to survive reduced foot traffic and spending. Restaurants, marinas, and specialty shops built their business models around affluent tourists who brought serious money to town. When that spending disappears, the entire economic foundation crumbles. Cobourg's tourism-dependent economy shows how quickly seasonal prosperity can vanish. But communities that build everything around extracting single resources from the ground face even more catastrophic collapses when those resources become unprofitable. Timmins. Timmins represents the most extreme version of resource extraction volatility, where entire communities rise and fall with commodity prices set thousands of miles away. 3 major mines suspended operations in 2024, affecting 2,100 direct employees and thousands more workers in supporting industries. When gold prices dropped and extraction costs rose, mining companies made cold, financial calculations that devastated an entire city. The housing market built on $90,000 mining salaries simply can't adjust to economic reality. Properties purchased by miners earning premium wages are now unaffordable for the service workers and retirees left behind. Homes listed at $450,000 made sense when skilled underground workers brought home substantial paychecks, but those buyers have relocated to Sudbury, Red Lake, or wherever mining operations still offer employment. Population decline has accelerated to 6.8% annually according to Statistics Canada data. Entire neighborhoods are emptying as mining families pack up for communities with active operations. School enrollment has dropped so dramatically that the public board is considering facility closures, which will force more families to relocate if they want adequate education for their children. Municipal service cuts are creating a downward spiral that's impossible to escape. Snow removal, road maintenance, and recreational facilities are being eliminated just as residents need community support most. When your tax base shrinks by thousands of high-income earners, maintaining basic infrastructure becomes financially impossible. The boom-bust cycle that defined Timmins for decades is entering what might be its final bust phase. Unlike previous downturns where miners could wait for prices to recover, global shifts toward renewable energy and recycled metals threaten long-term demand for traditional extraction. Timmins proves that resource wealth creates dramatic economic swings, but cities that built their foundations on providing services and manufacturing face more subtle yet equally destructive challenges when their core economic assumptions change. Owen Sound. Owen Sound's decline illustrates how shifting trade patterns can destroy communities that seemed economically stable. This Georgian Bay port city built its identity around manufacturing and shipping, creating what appeared to be a diversified industrial base. But global supply chain changes have bypassed smaller facilities entirely, leaving Owen Sound's infrastructure stranded. Port activity has decreased 34% as shipping companies consolidate operations at larger facilities like Thunder Bay and Hamilton. Container ships and bulk carriers simply can't justify stops at smaller ports when fuel costs and schedule efficiency matter more than regional convenience. The grain elevators and shipping terminals that once buzzed with activity now sit largely empty, eliminating hundreds of dock worker and logistics jobs. Manufacturing job losses tell an equally devastating story. Over 1,800 positions disappeared in just 24 months as companies relocated production to cheaper locations or automated their operations entirely. Firms like Canadian General Tower and other industrial employers that anchored the local economy for decades have either downsized dramatically or closed completely. Georgian Bay tourism can't possibly offset this industrial employment decline. Summer cottage visitors and weekend boaters don't generate the year-round, high-paying jobs that manufacturing and shipping provided. Tourism work is seasonal, lower paid, and can't support the mortgages that workers took on during better times. Home prices have dropped 18%, but buyers remain scarce due to job uncertainty. Even at discounted prices, who wants to relocate to a community where the major employers are disappearing? Real estate agents report that most inquiries come from retirees seeking affordable lakefront living, not working families looking to build careers. Owen Sound demonstrates how industrial decline doesn't stay contained within single companies or sectors, but spreads throughout entire regional economies until even communities with natural advantages find themselves competing for survival. Keноra's border location that once seemed like a strategic advantage has become an economic death sentence. This northwestern Ontario town built its entire economy around American tourists who crossed easily from Minnesota to enjoy Canadian fishing and cottage country. But currency fluctuations and travel restrictions have cut that lifeline completely. American tourist visits have fallen 52% as the weak Canadian dollar makes trips more expensive, while passport requirements and border delays discourage casual crossings. Visitors who once drove up for long weekends now consider Kenora too much hassle for too little benefit. When your customer base needs to cross an international border just to reach you, every policy change becomes an existential threat. Seasonal resort closures are eliminating over 900 summer employment opportunities, according to local tourism council data. Fishing lodges, marinas, and cottage rental operations that employed hundreds of seasonal workers are now shutting down entirely. These weren't just part-time jobs either. Many seasonal workers earned enough during busy months to support themselves year-round. Geographic isolation makes economic diversification nearly impossible. You can't simply pivot to manufacturing when you're hours from major transportation corridors. Service industries need local customers, but Kenora's permanent population is too small to sustain significant retail or professional services. The town is literally trapped by its location. The housing market reflects this economic desperation perfectly. Properties depend on seasonal workers who no longer come, and American buyers who've stopped crossing the border. Rental units sit empty while home values plummet, but there's simply nobody left to buy at any price. Kenora proves that geographic isolation doesn't just limit growth opportunities, it amplifies every economic shock because communities have nowhere else to turn when their primary advantages disappear. Unlike places where government employment and military spending provide different kinds of economic anchors. Pembroke faces the devastating combination of government downsizing and environmental regulatory pressure that's destroying communities across rural Canada. Canadian Forces Base, Petawawa. Workforce reductions are affecting over 1,400 military families, eliminating the stable, well-paid employment that anchored this Ottawa Valley town's economy for decades. The ripple effects extend far beyond the base itself. When military families spend less money locally and young soldiers request transfers to bases near growing urban centers, every business in Pembroke feels the impact. Restaurants, retail stores, and service providers that depended on military spending are watching their customer base literally pack up and move away. Environmental compliance costs are crushing the lumber industry simultaneously. Mill operations face expensive upgrades to meet new emission standards, forcing production cuts and layoffs just as the military employment base shrinks. The Pembroke area lumber mills that once provided hundreds of civilian jobs are now struggling to remain profitable under increased regulatory burden. Hospital and education budget cuts are eliminating professional employment opportunities that might have offset military and industrial job losses. Nurses, teachers, and administrators who could have provided economic stability are facing layoffs or reduced hours, creating a cascade of middle-class employment destruction. The housing market is trapped in an impossible situation. Declining demand from departing military families has reduced property values, but many residents can't afford to relocate because their homes are worth less than their mortgages. Military families with equity are requesting transfers to bases near Toronto or Ottawa, where career advancement opportunities actually exist, leaving behind a community struggling to redefine its economic purpose. Pembroke's multiple economic anchors are failing simultaneously, proving that even seemingly stable government and resource-based employment can disappear when political priorities and environmental policies shift.